Welcome to the American Society of Agronomy's webinar series on cover crops. My name is Luther Smith, the Director of Certification and Online Education for ASA, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'd like to start off by first thanking our sponsors, SARE, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, Iowa SARE, Minnesota SARE, National Association of Conservation Districts, DuPont Pioneer, Cover Crop Solutions LLC, National Wildlife Federation, Grassland Oregon, La Crosse Seed, the Cisco Companies, American Farmland Trust, Department of Soil Science, University of Wisconsin, Klinkenborg Aerial Spraying and Seeding, Practical Farmers of Iowa. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Sarah Carlson, Practical Farmers of Iowa, and Ryan Stockwell, National Wildlife Federation. Their involvement has been instrumental in putting our webinar series together. Coming up next week, on March 27th, is Cover Crop Management and Termination. And if you'd like to learn more about that section of our series or any of our other online programs, go to www.agronomy.org. And for additional resources, check out the SARE site. SARE programs provide farmers, researchers, professionals, and graduate student opportunities to conduct research that advances sustainable agricultural practices. And to learn more about cover crops following the webinar today, check out the Cover Crops topic room on the SARE webpage on your screen. One of the areas we will not be touching on is cover crops and crop insurance. And the reason for that, there was a really good webinar done in January. And if you'd like to learn more about cover crops and crop insurance, go to this link on your screen, and that'll give you some more information about it. If you'd like to ask any questions today, please write your questions in the question box located in your dashboard that appeared when you connected to the webinar today. Write your question in at any time, and then the speakers will address those questions at the appropriate time during today's webinar. So let's move on to today's topic and speakers. Today's topic is cover crop seed selection and planting. Jim Hoorman will be our first speaker, and he is an assistant professor with The Ohio State University and an extension educator in Putnam County, Ohio. He has been working with cover crops and soil health for approximately 8 years. He'll be followed by Keith Berns. Keith, along with his brother Brian, combined over 30 years of no-till farming with 10 years of teaching agriculture and computers. In addition to no-tilling 2,500 acres of irrigated and dryland corn, soybeans, rye, triticale, peas, and buckwheat in south-central Nebraska, they also own and operate Green Cover Seed, one of the major cover crop seed providers and educators in the United States. Green Cover Seeds has experimented with over 80 different cover crop types and hundreds of mixes planted into various situations, and they have learned a lot about cover crop growth, nitrogen fixation, moisture usage, and grazing utilization of cover crops. He's also developed a Smart Mix Calculator, one of the most widely used cover crop selection tools on the internet. So we'll get started. Jim will start off with today's topic. So Jim, I'll make you the presenter.
Okay. All right. There we go. All right. I'm going to be talking about cover crop seed selection. And I do want to thank a few people. I was able to get some slides from Barry Fisher, who's with the Natural Resource Conservation Service in Indiana, also Jay Fuhrer, the NRCS in North Dakota, and Ray Archuleta, who's with the NRCS Soil Health Team. So, you know, I often get asked this question, you know, what is the best cover crop to use? And really, there is no one best cover crop because they all do something just a little bit different. But really what we want to do is we want to try to address certain resource concerns. So, you know, probably a big one on just about everybody's list is we want to reduce erosion and sedimentation. Some of the grasses are very good at helping because they have a fibrous root system. You may want to try to avoid some of the crops that have tubers because if they die off, we've had some cases where we've actually had increased soil erosion. So if you are going to grow those, maybe you want to do those in a mixture and do a mixtures of both grasses and brassicas and legumes, and we'll talk about those terms in just a little bit. The other thing often we want to do is increase the soil organic matter, and just about all our cover crops will do that. It generally depends on how much biomass, both above ground and below ground, that you're going to produce. Often we're trying to manage excess nutrients, and certain cover crops will do a better job than others. If you want to promote biological nitrogen fixation, you're going to have to plant either a legume or a grass. We'll talk about those. All cover crops will help us increase biodiversity. But for example, if you're in a corn-corn rotation or a corn-soybean rotation, often you might want to try to bring in something that is a little bit different. So there's where the brassicas can really help us out. And we'll define all these terms in just a little bit. Again, we really like to reduce that soil compaction. All these roots in the soil help us to improve the water infiltration and also increase soil and water storage. And then we may be concerned about weeds, diseases, and insects. And what we found is that by increasing the biodiversity in your soil, you actually find that we have a little less weed pressure. Some of the diseases will start to have some predators that will start to come in and should help us with insect suppression. Now, that isn't to say that there may be some insects that may actually increase. So we've got to be careful about that rotation. In some cases, we may want to supply supplemental forage, and so we may want to graze it or hay it. And then all these cover crops, they help us increase soil productivity. This is a cover crop chart that has come from North Dakota. Got this from Jay Furr, and we kind of call this the cover crop periodic table. Right now, we probably have at least 68 cover crops. There's actually more, so this is by far is not a complete table, and we're adding them all the time. But let's just look at some of the elements that's with this cover crop chart. We have the cool season and we have the warm season. So generally, the cover crops that are grown in the cool season, we would plant them in late fall, late summer, early fall. And the warm season, generally they're going to either they'll die out or they're going to do most of their growing during the summer months. So we'll plant them either in the spring or early summer, and then they will grow. A large amount of the warm season cover crops are annuals, and they tend to die out with the first frost. We also have differences between grasses and the broadleaves, and within those broadleaves we have a lot of cover crops that are legumes or clovers, and those are the ones that are going to make nitrogen. So let's take a look at some of the different growth cycles. You'll see on here that some of them are marked with an A. That's an annual. So an annual is going to complete its life cycle in 1 year. Anything that's marked with a B is a biennial, so that means it has a 2-year life cycle, and if it's a P, a perennial, it can have multiple years. And then it's very important to look at this relative water use, because if you're in the west where you don't have near as much moisture, you're going to want to try to conserve your moisture. So you're probably going to want to look at those cover crops that have low water use. If you're in the east where we have high humidity and excess water, you probably may tend to want to use some of the cover crops that use a little bit more water, because through evapotranspiration we can actually help to dry out our soils. And then it's also very important to look at the plant architecture, and we'll talk again a little bit more about that. We want to try to capture as much sun as possible, so we want some that are very much upright. We want some that are kind of going to collect that sunlight from a medium range, and then some of them that are actually more prostate. So in general, we like to have maybe about 20% that are very much upright, about 30% that will collect that sunlight in that mid-range, and then probably about 50% or more that are going to be low-growing. Kind of think of it like a pyramid. So let's take a look at some of these in a little bit more detail. When we're looking at the warm season, we want both a diversity of broadleafs and grasses. All the ones that I have marked on the left-hand side here that have an L, those are legumes. So alfalfa, that would be a perennial. Most cases, there are some alfalfas that are just 1 year, but cowpeas, sun hemp, soybeans, these are all broadleafs. Again, these are all legumes. Most of them are only going to be annuals. They're only going to live 1 year, except for the alfalfa, which could live a little longer. Then we have the buckwheat, the sunflower, and the safflower. If we look at the grasses, corn is actually a warm season grass. We have the different types of millets, the proso and the pearl millet, the sorghums, the sedans, sorghum sedan grass mixes, the milo, and the teff. So again, if you're going to be planting, say, after wheat harvest, which may occur different parts of the country, it may occur at different times, but we have a fairly long growing season there after we take off the wheat if we're planting winter wheat, and we may have an opportunity to plant some warm season broadleafs and grasses, and these would be some of them that you might want to consider. As we look at some of the cool season different cover crop types, we have the grasses, and we have some brassicas there at the top, and then also some legumes. Let's start with the cool season grasses. We have barley and wheat. Those will both survive the winter, but then we also include oats in that. And generally, in most parts of the country, the oats will probably die off. Once we get into the low 20s and teens, the oats generally die off. We have spelts. Cereal rye or winter rye is very popular. It's probably the one that we can plant the latest. And we can plant that in most areas well into October, and in some cases even into November. I've been told cereal rye germinates at 32 degrees, and it will actually even grow underneath the snow. So you can plant it just about any time. If you want really good growth, though, the earlier you plant it, the better your growth. And on all the grasses, adding a little extra nitrogen, 40 to 50 pounds, you can either add that with manure or with fertilizer, or the other option is just plant another legume with it and plant them in a mixture. We also have triticale, which is often used for grazing. That's a combination of wheat and rye. And then annual ryegrass. Annual ryegrass is very interesting. It's actually a weed in the South. And some of these, I'll just have to mention this, some of these cover crops you may say, why are they on there? Because they're a weed in our area. But for different areas of the country, some of these are actually quite beneficial. So annual ryegrass we grow quite often in the Midwest, has a tremendous root system on it, but the reason it can be a little bit difficult to kill, and it takes top management. So we'll talk about that in more detail a little bit. We got the brassicas then. We have the mustards, the radish, the kale, the turnip. Again, in some areas, that mustard is considered a weed. Then we have the canola and the rape. Now the difference between rape and canola, rape is just basically a wild cousin of the canola. It's just a little tougher, and it tends to grow just a little bit better because it's not going for grain production. So sometimes it's a little more hardy. And then we have these legumes, these cool season broadleaf legumes, the winter peas, the field peas. Some of those we can plant in late summer. If they get growing quite tall, they'll actually die off. Other ones are considered a true winter pea. We can plant them in mid to late September, and they will maybe get just an inch or 2 or 3 inches tall, and they can actually survive the winter, and then they'll grow in the spring. The nice thing about these legumes, it varies depending on how much growth you have, but you can get anywhere from 50 to 75. In some cases, here in Ohio, we've been able to document as much as 125 to 150 pounds of nitrogen coming from some of these legume crops. Hairy vetch is another one that's typically grown, at least in our area, more on the hillsides. The problem with hairy vetch is it does have hard seed in it, and so you want to be careful if you're going to grow wheat out of that, because what it'll do is it'll grow above the wheat and spread out like morning glory, and that can make harvesting a little bit difficult. But hairy vetch is used in a lot of farms because you can get as much as 200 pounds of nitrogen if it's planted in the late summer. Then we have the red clovers, which do quite well under where we have a lot of moisture. The lupins and the lentils, those are starting to become more popular. Some of these we can plant actually in the spring before we plant another crop. And then we have the crimson clover and the sweet clovers. All these make a very good nitrogen. So what we're looking for, diversity in our cropping system, we want to make sure we have cool season and broadleaves. The cool season broadleaves, if you're going to be planting after, say in August and September, you're probably going to concentrate on cool season grasses and broadleaves. If you're planting after wheat, say in the summertime and you have a long period of time, you could actually plant all four of these and plant several of them as a mixture. And the goal is to increase that diversity in your soil. We're looking at diversity both above and below ground. We want to try to feed that soil biology, feed them a balanced diet. I like to say that these microbes will work for you, but you have to feed them. And 80% of the time, majority of the time, the microbes live under starvation conditions. If you have live roots out there, we say there's anywhere from 1,000, 2,000 times more microbes associated with live roots, and that's going to increase your soil fertility if you have microbes. As a matter of fact, I have a new definition for soil microbes. They're basically soluble bags of fertilizer. And so now what we're looking at is we want that diversity of sunlight and roots. We want to capture the maximum sunlight. If we can put about 20% of them in a mixture that's tall, 30% that is going to capture that sunlight from this medium range, and then 50% we want to be able to capture some of that sunlight that's coming through down their lower levels, more prostate. We also want to think about the different root structures and how we can capture different levels of moisture and nutrients. So for the grasses, they tend to have more of a fibrous root system. The moisture is going to be obtained anywhere from the surface down to medium depths in that root zone. For legumes, they tend to have tap roots, and they're also going to help to supply nitrogen to those grasses. The brassicas and the mustards, they're going to help us reduce the weeds and the pests. They tend to reduce moisture loss to evaporation by their shading of their leaves. So if you think about a radish leaf, they're quite big, and that helps to keep the weeds down. Plus, they also tend to have things called glucinates in them. This is a natural herbicide that will take out a lot of weeds. And so let's take a look at the legumes, the clovers. They help to make nitrogen with the help of the bacteria. Again, they provide that nitrogen to the grasses. Tend to have longer, deeper tap roots. Again, they're going to help with vertical compaction. They're going to help us recycle phosphorus and potash in the soil, potassium. But they also tend to acidify the soil. So for every unit of nitrogen that you produce, you actually produce about 2 units of hydrogen. And they do have less root mass. They have a much lower carbon to nitrogen ratio, so the biomass produced from legumes don't tend to stay in the soil quite as long as what we might get from grasses. So when you plant legumes, we want to make sure that we inoculate them. You want to be careful how you store any seed that you buy. You've got to keep it out of sunlight. You've got to watch the temperature. So if you have some cover crops and it doesn't seem like they're nodulating correctly, it might be because you didn't store the inoculant. Then that inoculant needs to remain cool. So be careful when you buy them. Don't buy the cover crops too early, or ask the dealer when you buy it how it's been stored. Second, if you decide to buy the inoculant, make sure that you follow the directions. You don't want to just pour the inoculant on the seed, because in a lot of cases it may say that it needs to set for 24 hours. So it does take some preparation. And then third, be careful where you buy your inoculant. We've purchased inoculant from 3 different dealers, and we actually had 3 different major results. So some dealers are much better at with their inoculant than others. So you might want to test a couple. And then finally, we want to talk about broadcasting and drilling legumes. It's actually probably better to drill them because if you leave them out exposed to the sunlight and to warm temperatures, you can lose some of that inoculant. But In some cases, if we're dealing with something like crimson clover, we can actually still broadcast it as long as we get a rain on there and it gets up fairly quickly. You still may be able to broadcast some of the smaller seeded ones. Let's take a look at the grasses. They provide carbon, they accumulate nitrogen. You may not have known this, but they actually provide phosphorus to the legumes. They help us reduce this horizontal soil compaction. They have this very fibrous, fine root system that helps to protect the soil, and it provides a habitat and food for those microbes. And they really help to promote good soil structure. Finally, we have these brassicas. They're going to help provide carbon and sugars. They add a lot of diversity to the soil, and they tend to really help with the earthworms, especially the radish. We like to say that the radishes kind of promote earthworm heaven. These earthworms really like the sugars that come from some of the radishes. They'll increase your microbial activity. They help reduce soil compaction. They improve the soil structure, and they're great weed fighters. They tend to have an allelopathic effect on a lot of the weeds in the soil. So that's why we like to put these together. So here's the different types of cover crops that we have. We have these legumes. We have the clovers. Again, we have the cowpeas, the winter peas, the hairy vetch, the soybeans, the red clovers. All of these are typical. The grasses, they help accumulate those nutrients because they have very fine roots. So that's why they're very good at bringing phosphorus back. The C to N ratio is going to really depend on when you kill them. So if you kill them early, they'll have a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you kill them later, they may have a little more lignin in them. And so here's some of the typical grasses that we have. And then we have the brassicas. The ones we tend to concentrate on are the daikon radish. That's that white radish. You don't want to buy a red one because those tend to be hot and they don't have as much root mass. The turnips, the kale, and the rape. So they help with compaction and also with improving weed control. So here's some of the easiest cover crops to manage. The reason I've separated these out is because most of the time it doesn't take a lot of management. They tend to die out, so you don't need a lot of herbicides on them. So you can plant oats or pearl millet. With the brassicas, you can generally plant a radish. In most areas of the United States, it gets cold enough in the winter that the radish will die. And then we have these legumes. The Austrian winter pea, especially if they're planted late summer, if they get enough growth on them, they're going to die out. And then sun hemp and the cowpeas, those are all summer annuals. And then the broadleaves, we have the buckwheat and the sunflower. Buckwheat, just a hint of frost and it will die. Same way with the sunflower. Sunflower has a nice a root on it that helps with compaction. So they're hardy, they grow fast, we get a quick return. There is a disadvantage. You have no long-term cover except from the residue during the winter. Kind of the ones I put in the medium would be these brassicas, the turnips, the mustards, the kale, and the rape. Again, the turnips, you may want to use those to graze. The kale and the rape, it may take some herbicides to kill those. Cereal rye, especially before soybeans, barley, the triticale, and the sorghum sudan grass. The only reason I put sorghum sudan grass in there is because you get a tremendous amount of residue. You may have to do something to help that residue depending on what crop you're going to plant next year. A little extra nitrogen or adding another cover crop after the sorghum sudan grass will help it to decompose faster. And then we have these legumes, the crimson clover, the red clover, the windham, winter peas, or the snow peas, and the blue lupins. Again, we may need some herbicides to kill these. They may require a little bit of management, but they do give us these will give us pretty much long-term cover in the winter. Even with the sorghum sudan, if it's dead, there's a lot of residue there. And then the high management ones are the annual ryegrass and the wheat because they can be a little hard to kill and it takes top-notch management. Cereal rye before corn, it can have an allelopathic effect, so you got to be careful there. Hairy vetch and sweet clover, mainly they may be a little because they have a hard seed on them. So some of these may be a little bit harder to kill. Again, some of the long-term benefits of these are we've got a lot of cover in the winter. They may produce a lot of benefits, but again, I would not start with these because these take the highest level of management. Let's talk real briefly about the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. This is what the Indians did. They used the corn. It was upright, had a fibrous root system for medium depth. It survived phosphorus for the legumes, and it was a pole for climbing for the beans. It gave carbohydrates to the Indians as a food source. The beans are kind of medium height. They're going to take up about 30% of that sunlight. They have a taproot. They're going to provide nitrogen for the grass. They're going to protect that corn from lodging, and they're a great source of protein in the diet. And then the squash, they're more prostate. They have a shallow root. They're going to take moisture from kind of a shallow range. They add diversity. The broad leaves that they have help reduce the weeds. That's going to help you decrease evaporation. So we're going to have a very nice microclimate there. They have spiny leaves, so they're going to keep away the predators. And they're going to provide oil and vitamins to your diet. So all these residues, all these high residues are going to help increase our soil productivity. If we're looking at mixtures, it kind of depends on seed size. The smaller the seed, the fewer pounds of seed that you'll need. Generally, the smaller the seed, the shallower you're going to put it in. The larger the seed, the more pounds that you're going to need, and the higher, probably the deeper you're going to put it in the soil. And here's the formula that we're going to use if you're going to put in a mixture. Just take the full seeding rate for each cover crop, divide that by the number of cover crops that you have in the mixture. So this is an oat, crimson clover, radish. If you take the full rate, divide it by 3, that will give you about the mixture that you need per acre. And then if you're going to do this in a mixture, set that opening size for that largest seed. We're trying to maximize organic matter. I'm going to finish up here real quickly. This is my last slide. Soil microbes are soluble bags of fertilizer. When we're in a conventional tilled system, look at what's going on here with the temperature and the aeration. If you're going to try to have microbes in the soil, we would prefer to have those soluble bags releasing those nutrients slowly over time. So which tillage system has more microbial activity? It's the no-till system where we've got that soil respiration going on, and that's an indication of how many microbes. Again, microbes in the soil are an indication of fertilizer. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to turn it back over to Keith.
Thank you, Jim. And we'll switch over to Keith. Let me change that.
Well, hello, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me okay. It's good to be with you. And Luther, are you seeing the right screen? I've got 3 screens on my computer, and I'm never sure which one's going to show up.
Yes, we see how to design cover crop mixes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
great.
You sound good. Go ahead.
Okay. Very good. Well, I want to just talk a little bit, kind of pick up on what Jim had laid the groundwork for there and talk about designing cover crop mixes. As Luther said earlier, we farm here in Nebraska, and we've been doing cover crop seed mixing and sales here for the last few years, and we've mixed over 10 million pounds of cover crop seed in the last 3 years, and the majority of that has been in diverse mixes. And so what I'm going to talk about primarily is these diverse mixes. And just a little bit about why we feel so strongly about the diverse mixes as opposed to doing monoculture type cover crops. If soil health is your goal, and I think that is the goal for just about anyone who's going to be doing cover crops, the diversity of the crop cannot be ignored or overstated. And we really feel like that plants were created to grow in these diverse ecosystems. If you look at the native prairie and how God created plants to grow together, it's always in diversity. And diversity is going to bring a great deal of resilience into your cropping system. And people that have been doing it successfully for a number of years, you know, the Gabe Browns and the Dave Brandts, their soils are so resilient that they rarely have crop failures just simply because of the healthy soil and the resilience that comes from. And also when we have a diverse cover crop mix, we have a balanced diet for the soil biology that Jim was talking about. We're not just flooding them with one particular type of plant root, but we've got all that nice diversity. And also, you know, we want balance because even good things, when they're not used in moderation, can be harmful to a system or to the soil. So we want to try to balance these out as best we can. And when we design these mixes, we try to get 4 things right. We try to get the right species. We need to make sure we get the right inoculants. We want to get the right seeding rates and the right seeding time. And if we can get those 4 things right, we typically can have a pretty successful cover crop mix. And just a couple of general things here before I kind of go into an example of actually designing a mix. In general, the more specific your goals are for your cover crop mix, the less diverse your mix will typically be. A good example of that would be we work with some organic producers, and their number one goal is to produce nitrogen. And in doing that, we typically just load up with a lot of legumes, and particularly hairy vetch, because they need to get it to overwinter. And so they don't have a real diverse mix, but they have a very specific goal. And also, the tighter your planting window, the fewer species will work, and the less diverse your mix will be. So if you're planting late in the season, there's fewer things that are going to work than if you're planting, in the middle of the summer or early summer or late summer. There's just a lot more options that you have. So I'm going to spend the majority of my time here giving an example of how we design mixes using our Smart Mix calculator. This is a tool that we have put together to assist us and our customers, and really anyone, because it's available free for anyone to use in designing these cover crop mixes. So this is just a screenshot of what it looks like. I'm going to take you, we're going to go to our website, and everything I'm doing right now is going to be right online, so everyone is free to be able to get on and do this. The old calculator, right now on our web page, if you click on the Smart Mix calculator, this is what the old version looked like, and it still works, and people can still submit things. They can go in and build mixes with that. But the new one is not quite ready yet, so we kind of have it almost a little bit hidden here. We're going to try to make it a little bit more accessible. But if you go to the Smart Mix tab, it's the Smart Mix 3 Beta. And it's a brand new version of this thing, and it's got a lot of lines of computer code, and so we're still trying to iron out some of the bugs. One of the things that you're going to have to do is, if you want to use this, is you'll have to register an account, because what this will do is it will save the mixes that you've worked on so that you can go back and look at them again, and that's the main reason for having an account. So if you're a new user, you would just click on the register button. I already have a user, so I'm just going to go ahead and log in. And when you log in, it's going to, of course, remember who you are based on your user ID and the information that you typed in when you registered. One of the kind of the cool features of this new version of the program is that there's a lot of geographic and weather data in here now. So right now it knows that I live in Bladen, Nebraska, so my zip code is 68928, and it knows that my average annual rainfall, and this is all based on 30-year climate averages, is 26.73 inches. My first frost is around October 3rd. My last frost is around April 30th, and my plant hardiness zone is zone 5B. And so any zip code that you put in, we got all this information in for 45,000 different zip codes across the United States. It's going to know that when you log in, and it will bring up that information. But you're not stuck to the zip code. So for the example today, I'm going to come down here where it says zip code. Since we do have such a wide geographic audience, I'm just going to pick something a little more central maybe to where our people are. We'll just design a mix here for Columbia, Missouri. So I just typed in their zip code 65201, and it changed my information up here. So now Columbia, Missouri, they get 43 inches of rainfall. Their first frost is about 3 weeks later than mine. Their last frost is that they're gaining about 20 days on me here on the last frost, and their plant hardiness zone 6A. So we're going to design a mix here, and you can label it however you want. You can put whatever name you want in here to describe it, and then you start putting in information about your mix, so the program can help you design a mix. The first thing you're going to do is say how you're going to seed it, either drilling or broadcast. And if you choose broadcast, then the recommended seeding rates are going to be a little bit higher. The program is going to want to know what your next cash crop is going to be. And that's important because we don't want to put something in your cover crop mix that's going to hurt your next crop. So in this situation, we'll just choose corn as our next cash crop. You can put in how many acres you want to plant, but you can always change that later, so we're not going to worry about that. The seeding date then, when are you going to seed this and when are you going to terminate it? And again, this is all information is going to go in to help make some recommendations. We're just going to do a scenario here of somebody has harvested their wheat off and they're going to come in with a cover crop after they harvest wheat. So we're just going to say we're going to plant this July 22nd, and we're going to terminate this. We'll just say November 1st because most of this the frost will take out. And so it says it's 103 days long, and we'll see some more information about that on the next screen. And then it asks you what your goals are. And you should never plant a cover crop without knowing what your goals are. Jim talked about some of the most important reasons why people would do cover crops, but we certainly want to know what your goals are in order to do this. And we've got, probably 12 or 14 of the most popular goals for doing cover crops listed here. In this particular situation, let's just say this particular farmer has cattle, so he's going to want supplemental grazing, but he's also going to want to reduce erosion as well. And you don't have to do the second and third goals, but they are optional. We will just say that he also wants to increase his soil organic matter. So once you've got all that information set, you click on the Next button, and it will go through here and bring up the second screen. It kind of gives you a recap of all of the geographic and weather data here. It shows one additional thing that it is calculating in the background, and that is growing degree days. And so for the Columbia, Missouri area, in this 103-day period, I've got about 1,846 growing degree days that my cover crop can utilize. And also in this period, I'm getting about 13 inches of rain in the Columbia area. And again, this is on 30-year climate averages. I'm sure they don't get that every year. It tells me my 3 goals here, just as a reminder. This whole box over here, this green box, that has everything to do with the cost of this mix. So as you go through and you build this mix, you'll be able to see immediately in a real-time basis what this mix is going to cost. And it's broke down cost per pound, cost per acre, and the total cost. And it also shows you seed cost, inoculant cost, mixing cost, and bagging cost. And I do want to just point out that you do not have to buy seed from our company to use this tool. It's on the internet. And as long as you don't hit the submit button, I'm not going to get an email saying that you were using it. And so you can certainly use this just to get a feel for what a mix might cost you, see what some of these numbers are going to be for these mixes. So don't feel like you have to be a customer of ours to use this. It's out there for anyone to use. So then the basis of building the mix is we've got our 4 main categories of plants here. Jim talked about all these. We got legumes, grasses, brassicas, and broadleaves. And these are not in this order because legumes are most important. That just happens to be the order that we put them in. So when I want to add one, I'm going to click on the Add button, and it will bring up a little drop-down menu here for me. And what it's going to give me is it's going to give me all of my different legumes that I have here, and it's going to give scores on them. And now, these scores are not necessarily all correct yet. We've got a lot of tweaking to do on this. We've got a lot of data in here that we're not exactly sure if it's right. And there's some things in here that I think are probably too high, and there may be some things that are too low. But it gives us a little bit of an idea. So I know that if I'm planting in July in Missouri, I've got a lot of heat to get through. So I'm going to choose cowpeas because I know that cowpeas will really tolerate the heat quite well. They're going to be excellent for grazing. They've got a score of 92 out of 100. And this number that shows up right next to it, and we need to get a title in right above it, but that number basically is saying 36 pounds is what I would recommend you seed if you were doing cowpeas all by themselves. And so that just gives you, we don't recommend planting them by themselves, but it gives you a place to start. So this is where I tell the program how many pounds I want. So if 36 pounds is a full rate, I'm just going to tell it I want 5 pounds in my mix. And so it'll go through and it will load that in. It also brings up a lot of information about cowpeas here. It tells me they're a warm season broadleaf. It tells me there's about 4,100 seeds per pound. It tells me how many seeds per acre I now have with that seeding rate, and it's giving me all the cost information as well. So I'm going to add one more legume here, and then we'll go add some other grasses and stuff. Let's go ahead and we'll do some hairy vetch, because we do want to graze this, and we maybe want to graze it both in the summer and also later on as well. So we will do hairy vetch. It's saying 14 pounds is a full rate, so we'll go ahead and do 4 pounds of that. And then we'll go add some grasses. I'm just going to add a number of things here, then we'll go back and look at what some of this information is. So under the grasses here, we've got a number of different choices. I'm going to choose some BMR pearl millet. I know that's going to be good grazing. And we'll do 4 pounds of that. And I'm also going to do some BMR sorghum sedan. And this would be the sorghum sedan would definitely be the tall stuff that Jim was talking about. And he had a good point. You know, if you get too much tall stuff, kind of like this background picture that I have here, it can really shade out your other things. So we'll just go 4 pounds of that as well. And since I want a chance to maybe graze this twice with that hairy vetch in there, I'm also going to add some winter oats, thinking that that's going to give me some grazing a little later into the fall and winter, and kind of use this as a 2-pass grazing. So we'll add 15 pounds of winter oats, and we'll load that up there. And then we'll look at some brassicas here. The impact forage collards, it's coming up as the best grazing brassica. We really like those as a brassica to graze. So we'll put a couple pounds of those in. And then I do want to add some buckwheat as well. And we'll put 3 pounds of buckwheat in and see what we have here. Okay, now, as I look at this, we'll just review where we're at here. So right now, we've got 37 pounds an acre. We've got 7 different species in our mix. We've got about 1.1 million seeds in our mix. And we've got this percent full rate is 169. And this is one of the most important numbers on this calculator, in my opinion, because this is kind of how pounds out of 36, and it's calculating right here that that's 14% of a full rate. Hairy vetch, I've got 28%. BMR pearl millet, we've got 36%, and so on down the line. And it adds all these up, and I'm at 169. And as I look at that, I think that's probably too high, because what we're basing our seeding rate on is not pounds per acre or seeds per acre, but it's that percent of a full rate. And we like to see that somewhere around 125, or if we're mixing warm and cool season species together like we are here with having the vetch and the collards and the oats, we can probably push that on up to 140 or 150, but 169 is too high. So I think as I look at this mix, I think we've got too much stuff in here. So I'm going to come and I'm going to kind of back off some of my pounds here and see if we can get that down to around 140. So we'll take out a little bit of the millet. We'll maybe back our collards off to 1.5 pounds. And now we're down to 144. I can probably live with that. That's probably still on plenty on the high side, but it's not bad. Again, if this is all warm season things, I'd probably want to see it down closer to 125 because they'll be a little more competitive with each other. But when I mix warm season and cool season things together, they're not all actively growing at the same time, so I've got a little bit more room to put more seed in there. If we look at our cost, Our seed cost, just the seed alone, is $30 an acre. The inoculant is 88 cents. The mixing cost is $1.75. So the total for this whole mix would be $34 an acre. And then as we look at these numbers over here, these give you just some benchmarks that you can compare one mix that you're working on with another. And the carbon-nitrogen ratio is a pretty important number. Jim talked a little bit about that, but it's going to be a good indication of how long is this residue going to stick around. And a number that is 20 to 25, and that residue, is probably going to break down relatively quickly. If you start getting below 20, that residue will disappear, within a matter of weeks. And once you're, this 30 and up, then you've got some residue that's going to be a little bit longer and stick around longer. And so we've got a carbon-nitrogen ratio of 37 here. That's going to be a little bit misleading in this particular mix because as my livestock graze this, the 37 is based on all of these plants growing until the 1st of November is when I said my termination date was. But I'm probably going to be grazing this stuff in October, so it's not really ever going to get to 37. So by grazing this mix, this carbon-nitrogen ratio will be lower. We haven't quite figured out how to adjust for that in our calculator yet. We've got to come up with a way to adjust those carbon-nitrogen for the grazing. Nitrogen fixation, all these other numbers are on a scale of 1 to 10, and with 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. So for nitrogen fixation, we're a 3.3 out of 10, which is not great, but nitrogen fixing wasn't one of our main goals, so that's okay. Grazing, we're a 9.4 out of 10. This is a pretty good grazing mix. I'm pretty happy with that. It's got a 6.9 out of 10 for drought tolerance, and that's simply looking at how drought hardy are these different species and how heavy are we planting them. 4.7 out of 10 for frost, so it's saying about half this stuff is going to survive the first frost. And 6.1 out of 10, saying, some of these things are going to overwinter for us in Columbia, Missouri. And that would mainly, in this situation, of course, be the hairy vetch and the winter oats. And the collards should overwinter there, too. It's pretty good, 8 out of 10 on a diversity score. We've got a very diverse mix here. And a 2.9 out of 10 on a salinity score. And that's just simply saying how good is it in the higher saline type soils. Some things are going to be definitely better than others in that situation. So we can go back, we can change these species, we can change the amounts that we have here, and it will change all of our numbers, it will change the prices and things like that. Right now, if you want to go back and change your planting date or your goals, you pretty much have to start over. And the reason for that is because if we allow you to change your goals here, the things that you already have selected would not necessarily still make sense in this mix. And so to change that, we're basically saying you just need to start over with a different mix. If I go ahead and click next, then I could continue on and I could save it, and eventually I could submit it if I wanted to order it, but that part is not working yet. So this is a kind of a quick overview of this program, but it does help you put together mixes, see what the cost is going to be, kind of get an indication of some of your ratios, carbon-nitrogen ratio, and how it might compare to other ones as far as nitrogen fixation and some of those other things. So we got a lot of work to do on this yet, so it's certainly not a perfect tool, but it's something that we're working on. If you have any suggestions or comments, we'd love to hear about it, and we'll try to improve it as we go. So I think my time's about up, Luther. I'll turn it back to you for some questions.
Thank you, Keith. And I'll open up our mics here for Jim and you, Keith, and we'll move to the questions. We've got a lot of questions in here. Our viewers are very interested in what you're talking about. Jim, this question is going to come to you. They wanted to thank you for the presentation, and they're asking, are there any suggestions for cover crop selection for saline soil, especially moderately?
Well, I am from the East, so I'm going to bring that right back to Keith, because Keith's probably a little bit more familiar, especially since he has this program here that talks about salinity, and
Sure.
That's not something I deal with a whole lot, so that's a little out of my expertise. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know, what gets recommended for saline soils and anywhere from moderate on up to fairly severe, barley. Barley is one of the best at tolerating high salts. Sugar beets do very, very well, and yellow blossom sweet clover as well. Those are the three that if we get into some really salty soils, those are the three that we kind of look at putting out there, being able to tolerate those high salts. Depending on what moderately saline, saline means, there's a lot of these other things that can tolerate, higher pHs and some moderate salinity. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head which ones I would rate as moderate, but I know barley, sweet clover, and sugar beets are definitely going to be the three best.
Thank you. We're going to move to some more. And Keith, this is referring to your Smart Mix calculator. How do you determine how many pounds of seed in a mix?
Well, again, we don't really worry about how many pounds per acre we're doing. We look at that percent of a full rate because it's going to vary greatly. If I'm doing all small seeded brassicas, my full mix might be 6 pounds. If I'm doing all large seeded things, it might be 60 or 70 pounds. So don't get hung up on number of pounds or number of seeds per acre, because when you do these diverse mixes, I don't think either one of those is a reliable way of figuring it. But look at what your percent of a full rate is. And kind of like what Jim was doing, he had 3 species and then he'd divide the full rate by 3 on each of those. That's a good place to start, but we really think with a diverse mix, you can do more than 100% of a full rate, and so that's where we like to see that percent of a full rate, somewhere between 125 and 140, depending on what all's in it.
And I would agree with that. That's just a very quick and dirty starting place, especially when you're mixing the cool season with the warm season. It doesn't hurt because you're going to have them growing at different times. So I would agree with Keith, but it does give you a place to start, and especially with this Smart Mix, this calculator here, you can start to adjust your numbers a little bit.
Okay, this next question is talking about inoculant. So they're asking, should I inoculate legume cover crop seed if I had been growing soybeans in rotation on the soil where they want to go with the cover crop?
And the answer to that one is you really need to know what type of cover crop you have, because all of them, some of them are similar to soybeans, but a lot of them aren't. So you really need to look to see what type of inoculant. And I wish I could give you a good resource for that. Maybe Keith knows of one where you can look that up to see what type of inoculant you need on that. Generally, if you do a search on the internet, you can find out what type of inoculant is needed for each type of seed.
That's exactly right. And the rhizobia strains are very specific to each plant species. So your soybean rhizobia probably aren't going to do anything for any of the species other than soybeans. Typically, peas, lentils, and vetch will take the same type of inoculant. Cowpeas, sun hemp, and mung beans will all take peanut inoculant. Clovers and alfalfas, there's about 3 different types of inoculant depending on what type of clover or alfalfa it is. Chickpeas take their own inoculant. So yeah, you really got to be careful. The approach that we've taken is we have a company out of Texas we work with. We have them make a custom inoculant for us that contains all of the different strains. So when we inoculate a cover crop mix, we're inoculating the whole entire mix, and whatever legume goes in there, then we've got the right rhizobia. And that inoculant also has some mycorrhiza and some other types of biological organisms that will help the non-legume plants as well. So that's kind of the approach that we've taken, but you certainly want to make sure you get the right strains of inoculant for the legumes you're using.
This next question is asking about lupins and lentils, and will they help build soil nitrogen if planted in the spring? And when is the appropriate planting date, and how much nitrogen credit can you expect?
I'll talk about lentils. I have not had much luck with lupins. I think we tend to be a little too far north to make the blue lupins work. I'm looking for a white lupin. I think it will work better up here. So we're more familiar with lentils. Lentils can be planted as soon as soil temps hit in the low 40s. They're not as aggressive of a growing plant as peas or vetch, but they still can be quite a nice crop. You know, if you're growing them prior to another spring planted crop, you're probably not going to get a tremendous amount of nitrogen fixed out of them, simply because a lot of the nitrogen that they fix would not come until, you know, probably late April through the middle of May, and most guys probably aren't willing to let them grow that long. But if they're part of a late summer planted cover crop, you know, the lentils will grow till it gets down to the low teens. So, you know, I would think you could get 50, 60 pounds of nitrogen out of a nice crop of lentils if you had a lot of lentils out there. And then, of course, if they were in a mix, you would have to back that off depending on the concentration of lentils. And I'll let, I don't know, Jim, do you have more familiar with lupins?
Just a little. I don't have a lot of experience with the lupins. I know the lupins are extremely popular in France. And some guys that I've talked to that are growing them early in the spring. If you're a little bit further south, the further south you go, they'll actually plant them like in March, and about like a pea, and then they'll terminate them. They'll actually let them grow as long as they can. Sometimes they, you know, understanding the difference in crop insurance rules. If you don't have crop insurance, they would actually plant their crop and then terminate the lupins a little bit later date just to get more nitrogen out of them. So there's a number of things that we're still in a very much an experimental mode on a lot of these things. So we have new information coming in each day as growers and researchers are experimenting with these things.
Our next question here is talking about the subsequent crop. So the question is it better for the subsequent crop to have cover crops be terminated over the winter, or would there be some benefit to have the cover crop over winter and terminate in the spring? So timing of termination is what they're asking about.
I'll give you my preference. I think from a soil erosion standpoint, and again, if we're thinking of these microbes in the soil as soluble bags of fertilizer, if you have a crop that's living and growing, you're putting in the sugars and the polysaccharides into that soil, you're feeding the soil. So the longer you have something living and growing out there, I think there's a real benefit to that. Now, that also means generally, I think, as I showed, that the management increases. So there's probably a higher chance that something can go wrong if you let it grow too long. You could dry out the soil. You know, it may get too tall, may have too much lignin, and depending on what the crop is after that, it may not affect your soybeans, but it may have an effect on corn. So it does take more management, but you do increase the benefits. So you know, if you're starting out, start off with the simple ones. As you gain more experience, start to experiment with some things to increase your biodiversity.
This next question is talking about the diverse mixes and their impact on the harvester, considering V6 stage of corn and how the biomass buildup, will it impact the during harvest?
Well, you know, if they're looking at interseeding some things into corn at the V6 stage, I have not done a lot with that yet. I know a lot of people are trying different things. My guess is that most things are not going to be a harvesting issue simply because they're going to be suppressed by the corn canopy. Now, some exceptions to that could be cowpeas or a forage soybean could get quite tall, and anything that tends to want to climb or vine, you know, can get up into that corn canopy. But I still don't think they would be a harvest issue simply because those things are going to die with the first frost, and they're going to, you know, not be green when they're harvesting. So I guess I should say, if you're in the south and you're not going to have a frost kill those out, you know, cowpeas or forage soybeans could be a harvest issue planted that time of year. Most people, though, if you're planting either a cool season thing or something that's going to be fairly low growing, with corn, it is not going to be an issue harvesting, in my opinion.
I would have to agree with Keith. We've experimented with sun hemp. That is a very common practice in the tropics, sun hemp with the corn. Matter of fact, that's one of their major sources of nitrogen. We're experimenting with forage soybeans, like a group 7. Typical group, we would have like a late group 3 or early group 4 in our region. So we're planting a group 7. We're going to do an experiment where we plant them halfway in between the row and then actually right in the row. There seems to be some benefit to mingling those corn roots with the soybean roots. And those will not go to seed production, and they do take moisture from a little bit different areas. So we're just starting experiments on that, so we'll have more information in probably a year or two.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you both Jim and Keith. We're at the end of our hour, so we're going to wrap things up for today. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, thank you to our sponsors who are listed on your screen. And just as a reminder, if you're interested in connecting with us next week, March 27th, will be our final session in the series on cover crops, cover crop management and termination. And you can find more about that on our website and to register, www.agronomy.org. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today, and that'll conclude our webinar for today.